all about the crochet. I'll put you in the know. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Jayda InStitches show.
Hey everybody, thanks for dropping by. We've had some questions about pilling lately. Pilling, what is it? What makes it happen? And is there any way to avoid it? Well, pilling is the act of fibers in a fabric rubbing together, rubbing against other fibers of other fabric, and turning into little knots. And I have an example here. You'll typically find pills on fabric that is knit or crocheted. It happens on loosely spun fibers, so the looser the spin or the weave in your fiber, the more of these little tiny fibers that stick out, the more likely you are to get pills. So all of these little fibers are rubbing together and they're rubbing against other fibers from other fabrics. For example, this blanket rubs around on the couch, it rubs around on me, and it'll even pick up other loose fibers and they all get knotted together and they literally turn into little pills or little balls. So that's what pilling is. You'll commonly find it on blankets that you use a lot, maybe high traffic friction areas like where your arm rubs against the side of your body on your sweaters, and even, for example, on some of your outerwear. Now, you wouldn't think that a hat would see a whole lot of pilling because really, what's it going to rub up against? But here in Canada, it can get pretty cold and I tend to pull my hood up over top of my hat. So I'm starting to get some pilling on the top of my hat. And it's basically just all of those little loose fibers rubbing together along with the fibers on the inside of my woolly hood, and they're all turning into tiny little knots. Pilling also happens when you toss your items into the washing machine or the dryer. You've probably noticed it on things like your hoodies or other items of clothing. After a while, they start to get these little balls on them. So there are a few ways that you can reduce the amount of pilling on an item or an article of clothing, and you can also sort of remove them. If you want to be meticulous and it's particularly like a hat or something that you really, really like and you want to take the pills off, you can go around and like pull up on them and snip them off with a pair of scissors, especially if they're really, really big pills. But you will find that the fabric tends to thin in that area over a while, and if you snip off enough pills, then sooner or later there's going to be like a thinning to that fabric. My mother-in-law has a funky little device. It's sort of like an electric shaver, and you turn it on and you sort of lightly run it over top of the item or the article of clothing, and it snips off all the little pills, and that's kind of an effective little gimmick. And she uses that sort of for a lot of her outerwear, so like her scarves and her hats and stuff. If you want to avoid pilling, sometimes it's unavoidable, especially depending on the kind of fibers that your product is made out of. And I mean, we're all going to be moving and touching like our sweaters and our blankets and stuff. But you can reduce how much rubbing happens in the washing machine or the dryer. So for example, you can choose to hand wash articles of knitwear or crochet wear that you really want to avoid having that weird, worn-in, pilled look happen on. So if you hand wash them in the sink or the bathtub or a big bucket or something, you can be very careful about squeezing it and not rubbing it together. So when you rub things together, that creates more pilling and more felting. So any way you can wash an article and reduce the amount of rubbing and friction that happens, that will help a long way. Also, don't throw things in the dryer. So if you lay your items flat or you hang them over a drying rack to dry, then they're not going to be rubbing up against each other or anything else in the dryer, and that too will help reduce the amount of friction and tumbling and pilling that happens with all those little fibers. Now I know you're not going to want to hand wash everything. So one of the ways in which you can help reduce the amount of pilling on the outside of your clothing, for example, is to turn it inside out before you toss it in the washing machine or the dryer. So any pilling that is going to occur is going to happen on the inside of your clothing because that will be the surface that's rubbing up against other articles of clothing and even itself. So the pilling will be much reduced on the outside if you turn it inside out before you put it in the washing machine or the dryer. And there you go. Different fibers are going to felt differently, they're going to knot up differently, and you're going to have pilling happen. It's kind of one of those things that happens in life, but there are some of the ways in which you can remove them or reduce the pilling that happens on your clothing and your favorite blankets. I hope you found that helpful, and we will see you here soon on the Jayda InStitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an awesome week, everybody. Bye!